Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Marn Talks NRL SuperCoach. Today we're going through the halfback deep dive analysis. Now, some of you may think this is going to be a fairly quick and easy video to answer, but always still worth talking through the position and any other potential ways apart from the very popular Nicho Hynes and Nathan Cleary combination. So definitely stay tuned if you want to hear some extra thoughts on these two plus any other potential options. Do give the video a like if you do enjoy it, and do please consider subscribing as well. The target is still to hit 3,500. I said by round one, I think we're going to get there, so let's make it big and bold. Let's make it 4,000 subscribers by round one. So appreciate all of the new subscribers as well. Do follow me on Instagram. Do follow me on Twitter as well if you don't already. Do join the overall league. The code is below me, 673281. Enough of the plugs, let's get straight into it. So taking a look at the halfback position over the last 3 years, this is a high upside, high scoring position. Now, the general pool of halfbacks who actually can meet this category of being in the top 20 averaging players is generally fairly small. In the last 3 seasons, we've seen 4 halfbacks in each year's top 20, but they always get close to the top. Last year's top 2 were halfbacks Nicho Hynes and also then Nathan Cleary. You've seen their names also pop up in 2022. Nicho Hynes was the top halfback with an average of 86, Cleary the second with 80. And in 2021, which was that ridiculous scoring year, Nathan Cleary was the second highest averaging player overall, highest for halfbacks at 108. So they clearly stand out as the top 2. There are some other potential options. We had Shaun Johnson and Cherry Evans in the top 20 for last year, Mitch Moses and Jerome Hughes in 2022. Cherry Evans appears again also in 2021, and as well as Jerome Hughes. So what you're seeing is a very clear, I think, top 2, Hynes and Cleary. And generally each year there's a couple of other 2 who can force their way into that top 20. Cherry Evans, Jerome Hughes, Shaun Johnson was obviously a big surprise last year. Mitchell Moses, they're probably the other guys that you can consider. But it is very clear to see that the halfback spot is a high upside position. And this is why you're going to see a lot of teams out there are just going to default into that Nicho Hynes, Nathan Cleary combination. They're very expensive, but they are the highest scoring players. They have that ceiling of going 100 plus very, very often. Captaincy options as well. There's a lot of reasons why they're very, very popular, but we will see potentially if there are some avenues to not start with them. But it's very plain to me that this is a position that you do want to be spending money and you do want to prioritize in getting in your big gun players. So moving on to the key players, Nicho Hynes and Nathan Cleary. Do you just lock them in? I won't generally go too much into the stats. I wanted to talk about a few other interesting pieces of information about these two. So obviously last year they were the highest averaging players, both coming in at over 900k this season. So extremely expensive. What I found just very interesting was their ability to go big so much more often than all of the other halfbacks. So I've looked at 90 plus point games, which I feel like is a safe number to look at when you're looking at a player that you want to captain. Look, if your captain gets 90 points every week, you'd be pretty happy with that. Nicho Hynes went 90 plus 60% of his games that he played last season. 60% of the time he was scoring over 90. That is actually just ridiculous. Cleary wasn't that far behind. He was 47%. Now, when we get onto some of those other gun options, they're kind of hovering around the 25 to 30%. So there is a very clear standout that these are the guys who have got that bigger ceiling in them, and they just hit it way more consistently. They do everything that you want your halfback to do. They're involved in their team's play. They create those try assists, line break assists. They both goal kick. They're just integral to their team. I do discuss this a little bit more in my best guns video, which I'll put a link for in the description below. But one of the key takeaways was out of the whole top 20 averaging players, it's the guys who are the most influential to their team with those big attacking stats. They're the ones who are generally the best for SuperCoach, and these two just fit the bill. So I think we all know the quality of the player. I think the more interesting discussion is, let's say, if you could only choose one of the two, who would you be prioritizing? And is there potential to fade one of the two, or do you just make the easy decision and to start with both of them? So I'm pretty certain that if there's only one of the two that I could start with, it would be Nicho Hynes. They both have got a fairly early buy. Hynes has got his in round 5. Cleary has his in round 6. Just the draw leading up to that first buy for each of these players, I think Hynes is definitely much better in my opinion. Both have got tough away games, Warriors and Melbourne for Hynes and Cleary, but then round 2, round 3, Hynes has got Bulldogs at home and then West Tigers away, whereas Cleary's got Parramatta at home, Broncos away. And you can form a bit of a narrative with Cleary where, look, Melbourne away is not that easy, Parramatta do seem to do well against Penrith, Broncos away, that's a grand finals rematch, then it's the Roosters and Manly Sea Eagles before the bye. So I think for that first 5-6 rounds, the draw is definitely tougher for Cleary, in my opinion, just when you look at it on paper. Round 2, round 3, those are games I do not want to be not owning Nicho Hynes. And I think a big part of this game is the enjoyment factor. I did not enjoy watching Nicho Hynes come back in round 4 last year and score 180 points against the Dragons. I don't want that experience again. He will be my captain most likely round 2, round 3, and so automatically he becomes worth the 970k. Surprisingly, he is actually less owned than Cleary. 34% owned at the time that I pulled these numbers. Cleary was 42%, so almost 10% higher for Cleary. I factor a lot of that probably due to the way that Cleary finished end of last season. He was absolutely tremendous. Obviously, his grand final performance was one of the best of all time. But I feel like Hynes is probably, dare I say, a better Supercoach player than Cleary, just because Penrith themselves are just an overall great attack. Whereas with the Sharks, everything I think just goes through Nicho Hynes. And so I think he's the accumulator. That's the general pun you would say with Nicho Hynes compared to Cleary. So I definitely would prioritize starting with Hynes over Cleary if you can. And look, Hynes is more expensive as well. So something I mentioned in the last few videos, if you ever needed to make the switch, it's always easier to downgrade. So that's one of the reasons why I definitely think I'd be prioritizing Nicho Hynes. What I've got below me as well is the average each of these players have against their respective opposition for the first 10 weeks. So what that translated to was that over the first 10 weeks, Hynes technically is predicted to score close to about 100 points more than Cleary with an average of 85, and Cleary with an average of 74. So in terms of the pure numbers, Hynes does stack up better. He has got probably less sample size of games playing a halfback than Cleary, and people may comment that the Sharks have probably had slightly easier draws over the last couple of years than someone like Cleary. But again, I would say that the Sharks do have the same thing again for the first 10 weeks. So another reason why I'd be prioritizing Nicho Hynes. Now, if you all remember my first preseason team reveal, I didn't actually have Nathan Cleary. I started with Mitchell Moses. Part of my thinking was that Cleary coming off this injury that he was carrying in the grand final, they're going to have the World Club Challenge just before the start of the NRL season. Could he potentially take some time to transition into the season? We have seen this the last couple of years where he had a couple of low scores around the 50s, 60s, and then he came out with massive 150 point games. So he has got this thing where he starts a little bit slow and then all of a sudden he just kicks into gear. And when I looked at it on paper, I thought, well, draw is kind of tough to start the season. And then maybe in round 7 when he's got the West Tigers at home, that's absolutely a game that I think I will need him. And so I give myself the 5 weeks to build up the bank to then get to Cleary. And I was looking at Mitchell Moses as somewhat of a stepping stone. I've kind of cooled my thinking on Moses. One, because I want to probably have Dylan Brown in my team and I'd be putting a lot of eggs into that Parramatta basket. And how confident I am in them to start the year still remains to be seen. The other thing with Cleary is that yes, while the games on paper are tough, if I looked at his averages against each of those teams, average of 74 over the first 10 weeks. And if you look across the first 5 weeks, he'd be averaging about 77.5 points against his first 5 opponents. One thing as well with his Parramatta average, it's 59.4, but do remember that included a game where he scored 4 points, and that was that game where he got sent off. So if you take that game out, that's probably a bit of an outlier. His average against Parramatta increases to 64.5. So that 77 average is obviously very healthy. One thing in that team reveal video I said was that for Mitch Moses last season, against the quote-unquote easy opposition, he averaged 75. So even Cleary with tougher games was still outscoring Moses when he had easier opposition. So part of me thinks that if I know I'm going to want him by round 7, and I know he's got that big ceiling, just trust the player who, as we saw before, has done it consistently year on year as being one of the top 2 halfbacks in Supercoach. I think you're probably going to sleep easier at night just knowing you've got both of these two in your starting team, and I'm starting to lean that way as well. I do see some temptation in wanting to go someone else you think might be able to match him, but when I look at his ownership being at 42%, something that I'm also thinking is you probably can't win Supercoach in the first 5 weeks, but you could definitely lose it if you don't start with one of these two and they go absolutely big and you've got 34% of the field owning one of the two and most likely captaining at least Nicho Hynes. Clearly there's some argument that he maybe isn't going to be so heavily captained to begin the year, but still that ownership is quite scary when you look at it. And am I willing to take a bet that he starts slow when that many teams own him? Now, if it paid off and the guy that you got matched him and you're able to move to him in round 7, then you've obviously done very, very well. Just how much do you trust that guy that you're starting with that's the big question. And so I think at the moment I'd rather put my trust in Cleary and started leaning towards upgrading Moses to Cleary and just finding that cash somewhere else in my team, because this is that high upside position and maybe it's not worth the compromise of the potential that I know Cleary has. Hynes is pretty much locked into my team and I don't think he'll be going anywhere. Just to touch on this point a little bit more, I pulled some stats over the last 3 seasons of how each of these two perform at various stages during the season. That Cleary has missed some games through injuries. I tried to break it up into kind of the first third of the season, middle third, and then the last final third of the season. You can see with Hynes, he generally kind of has a bit of a dip So he starts very strong. We saw that in 2023 where his average kind of reduced as the season went. Same thing happened in 2021. 2022, it didn't really happen. He actually got better towards the middle and the end of the season. With Cleary, I think the general trend is that he typically will kind of reduce an average in the middle part of the season, and that makes complete sense when he's got Origin, potentially gets arrested, or maybe he gets some lower minute games as well. But generally starts the season pretty strong. I believe he averaged around close to 90 over the first third of last season. Similar thing, even more than that, actually happened in 2022 when he absolutely killed it. And again, 2021 was a very high scoring year. So just looking at that first third of the year, there was no average that was below, call it 80. So again, I'm looking at Cleary where historically he is a guy who may have a couple of low games to start the year, but generally he will be able to offset that with some really big games. So I'm thinking over a 5-6 week sample size, it's probably not worth taking that head-on bet with Cleary, him potentially going lower. There's probably going to be a game or two in there where he goes 120, 130, and even if he scored 60 in the week before, he's going to equalize to that good average that we know that he can get. The one thing with Cleary that I did note is that generally the end of the season is when he will typically be his best. The 2021 number for the middle of the season is a little bit misleading because that was a season where he was scoring like 225 and things. I don't really put as much stock into that. But we're mainly just focusing on the beginning of the season here. Given that Hynes starts strong, Cleary is also generally a strong starter as well. Something I noticed with Mitch Moses, who is probably the guy that I think a lot of people may be looking at as the third guy for their halfback. He typically actually does better in the middle of the season. It does seem to be a trend where Parramatta maybe start a little bit slow. And then in the middle of the season, they don't tend to be a team who loses a lot of players to Origin. This was obviously before Mitch Moses did play Origin for New South Wales. But there was a period where Gutho, him, and Dylan Brown were all still available during the Origin period. And obviously when they're coming up against teams who are weakened, they're able to do a little bit better. So just looking at those other couple of things, I know it's a boring answer, but it really is making me lean towards Hynes Cleary is the combo. And to make this just a little bit more interesting, I wanted to put it out there to you guys out there as well, and shout out a few of my favorite Twitter followers out there too. Who is your halfback combination and why? On the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of Cleary Hynes. Matthew Bruma _23, Cleary and Hynes, non-negotiables for him, too elite and proven, not having to worry about wasting a trade on getting them in later. And I do think that this is a big thing as well because there are unexpected things that come up during the season. If you just know that you've got these two set and forget in your halfback spot, you can focus your trades on other areas of your team. SuperCoach Guns, great Twitter account as well. Cleary Hynes for him. He's also open to Sam Walker and Aiden Sezer, but the two gun halfbacks are just too easy to lock in. NRL Sponge, I would say probably close to my favorite Twitter account, absolute legend. Cleary Hynes, why? Because they're the two players in that position who score the most consistently, and I think the numbers prove that as well. And same for Moz, no one else is close, and I really do think that is quite obvious. Few towards the bottom on the right hand side, we've got Way Good and we've got Ed, Hynes and Sam Walker, and Hynes and Mitch Moses. So quickly on the Hynes Mitch Moses combination. Hynes over Cleary because I think he's a better captaincy option early on, similar to my thinking as well, so I agree with Way Good on this one. With Moses, hopefully he can start hot with the draw and match Cleary before flipping Cleary after his bye. Better team balance. This is my original thinking with the preseason team reveal. I like the Parramatta draw, and I thought maybe there was some merit in Moses being a stepping stone to Cleary. But again, I just went back to the whole Cleary thing because of how well he starts historically when you look at a slightly longer sample size of games. And even Cleary's kind of worst still tends to be better than Moses at his best against easy opponents. With Ed on Sam Walker, the Cleary money strengthens the rest of the squad and gambling on a slow start from Cleary. But this is the thing that, again, brings it back to the whole Hynes Cleary thing. Similar thing I noticed with both of these people. With the Way Good, he said Cleary because hopefully Hoses can start hot and match him. And with Ed, he's gambling on the slow start from Cleary. You're kind like, this is just the thing, like, do I want to be gambling or waiting or hoping that this guy doesn't perform well when we've seen over the last few seasons how good he can be? This is when I come back to the enjoyment factor. I want to enjoy the players that I watch and own. Am I going to enjoy SuperCoach hoping for Mitch Moses, who can have a very low game in him, trying to match someone like Cleary, who I know can be sitting on 50 points after 75 minutes and then goes bang bang, ends up on 110 because he just gets a junk try, which he's very good at doing. So no, I don't really want that. So boring answer, but I think I'll be going Hynes Cleary, and that is probably the way that majority of players are going. You just need to be comfortable with the risk if you're not starting with someone like Cleary. Hynes seems to be pretty much locked in most teams. So on the question of other gun players, there was 4 that I wanted to call out here. We have Sean Johnson, Daly Cherry Evans, Jerome Hughes, and Mitch Moses. So Mitch Moses, very quickly touching on him, he's probably the one who I think is more popularly owned of these four. He's currently 9% owned in SuperCoach. It's really the draw that's the swing factor for him. If you look at the first 6 to 7 weeks, which is basically the time that you would want to switch to Nathan Cleary, he's got a pretty good run of games. Good games that I look at here is Bulldogs at home, West Tigers at home, Cowboys and the Dolphins all at home. So he's got 4 home games in the first 7, and the opposition are pretty good. Penrith away is obviously quite tough, but as I say, Parramatta do seem to be a team who can still do okay against Penrith. Then you've got Manly away and Canberra away. So on paper, draw looks pretty good. I did pull his historic averages against each of these opponents as well. And you're looking at a 10-round average of about 62. And you're looking at a first 6-round average of 55. Now, I know historics isn't everything because he's probably improved as a player over the last 2 seasons. But again, the numbers stack up where I'm saying, look, the games are good on paper. But it's probably really that Bulldogs and the West Tigers games where he historically has done very well. Aside from that, though, his scores are kind of more around that mid-50 range. And the thing with Moses, he's got fairly low base. As you can see, he averaged 21 in base from last season. He's just got that ability to go really, really low in some games. And the worst feeling I can imagine is Moses going 20, 25 points and Cleary absolutely kills it and I don't hurt him. So Moses, I was keen to start with, and I probably still would prefer him out of these 4, just because that draw is probably the best out of these other 4. But still, there is obviously going to be some risk to him. He had 5 games over 90 last season, so as a percentage of all of the games he played, generally good minutes, it was about 26%. Clear drop-off from Cleary, who had 47% of games where he scored over 90. With SJ, so he's 6% owned, so he's the next most owned out of these other gun halfbacks. He's quite expensive, 793k, and I just feel like it's a 120k difference to Cleary, which obviously is not a small amount of money, but it doesn't feel too bad. The draw does feel quite tough as well. Sharks at home is probably a pretty good game, but then you've got Melbourne away, Raiders. Raiders at home is probably fine, but then Newcastle at home, Rabbitohs, Manly. Again, it's not really until round 7 when I look at like Dragons, Titans, do I think that there are some games where he can go really, really big. And I just think my view of him is more around the Warriors. They were fantastic last season. I just have a feeling that they're just going to regress slightly this year. I mean, maybe it's unfair to say that they were predictable, but a big part of SJ's SuperCoach success last year was that whole right side play where there'd be overlaps created on the right hand side and he'd be feeding the ball to CNK, which eventually could go to DWZ, or SJ himself would just put through CNK or maybe his back rower. Very, very right-sided dominated team the Warriors were, and you can see it below me in the creative numbers of 34 points a game, by far the best out of any of these other 3. And so I just feel like if teams are able to work them out a little bit better, they know they expected a bit more, I guess, this season from the Warriors. So maybe you can just take a bet that the draw on paper isn't the most ideal. Maybe they're going to regress slightly. Those are kind of enough factors for me to not start with SJ, but he will definitely become a factor. I can see potentially people in round 7 maybe moving to him if one of the Hynes Cleary combination isn't working out so good. Cherry Evans has proven to be a good SuperCoach option in the past, very, very low owned, only about 2%. He does have more of a ceiling in him. 32% of times last season he did score over 90. And I find with Cherry Evans, when he goes big, he goes really big. A lot of that sometimes is due to the fact that he is goal kicking, and unfortunately a lot of it is also due to Tom Trbojevic sometimes just not always being available during the season. And as soon as Tommy Turbo is out of that Manly team, Cherry Evans runs the show. And so that's when generally his attacking stats will increase. And I guess when you've got Turbo fit and firing for the start of the season, a lot of people are probably willing to spend that Manly money in Turbo and not Cherry Evans to start the season. And with Cherry Evans, I feel like at 780k, when you've got SJ who goal kicks, you've got Mitch Moses who goal kicks, it's probably just another small factor that I slightly prefer to them compared to DCE. So he's personally probably not going to be for me for the start of the season. And similar with Jerome Hughes, he tends to be fairly consistent. He's got an average last year of 70.8. That was made up by some really, really big games. There was one notable game where he scored 156. But generally, he's more of the type of player who I think can score around those 40s, 50s, and 60s, but generally has those occasional really big games to bring his total season average up. And when I look at their draw as well with Penrith, Warriors, Knights, and then a bye in the first 4, it doesn't really feel like the kind of matchups that I think I'd want to be targeting at least in the first 4 to 6 weeks. So again, he's very low owned, and that's probably for fair enough reason. He's probably not someone who I'll be considering as well for halfback. And just in general, these guys against the opposition over the first 10 rounds, they tend to average between the 61 to 64, a clear gulf from Hynes and Cleary. So again, none of these options, apart from maybe Mitch Moses, because he's slightly on the cheaper side and has probably got the best draw, aside from him, there's probably none of these other guys I will really be considering for round 1. Final section I wanted to talk about was some other options and potentially some value options. You'll note that Matt Burton isn't in this list. I feel like I want to talk about him in the 5/8 video, so that's why I haven't got him here. Sam Walker, we did see a few people have Sam Walker based on some of those Twitter comments, 4.7% owned. Sam Walker is a guy who has in the past had some good averaging seasons, so 2021 averaged 62, and this was when he was a cheapie, so he was obviously a very popular option for SuperCoach. In 2022 was an average of 59. Last season, only an average of 60, and he did obviously get some reduced games because he only played about 8 games all season because he had some injury issues, plus also got dropped early on by the Roosters. So a lot of people are probably looking at Sam Walker as hopefully a return to form. He is a goal kicker, which is something that is appealing about him, but tough draw on start with Broncos, Manly, Rabbitohs, and then Penrith. And we've seen over the last few seasons that Roosters can be a slow starting team. Now, they probably can't afford to be starting as slow as they have in previous seasons if they want to have a really good crack at the top 4 and potentially winning a competition this year. But there's a lot of things about, they have got a lot of really gun players, and there is an element of sometimes too many cooks potentially in the kitchen. And so Sam Walker is the goal kicker, but he's not the primary playmaker. And I think with your halfback, you probably want to be going for that guy who is the primary playmaker. So for Warriors, it's clearly SJ. Sharks, clearly it's Nicho Hynes, and it's clearly Cleary for the Penrith Panthers. I think with Walker, he's at a cheap enough price where if you needed to make that downgrade, if he absolutely kills it, you can. But he feels like a guy to me who, look, he generally has slightly lower games in him as well. He hasn't got the highest base. His base average is 25 from last season, which is okay. He did have a game last season where he scored 92 points, and otherwise it was around 82, 71, 76. So he does have some games in there where he can still score fairly well, but probably just lacks that big 120, 130 that we know that Hynes and Cleary can have. So again, he's a player who's interesting. I started with him last season, but I think this was when the Roosters had a really good draw to start the season. When they don't have it this year, and I'm less confident in their starting ability, he's probably a player who I'm going to be avoiding. Luke Brooks, surprisingly, at 8% owned, fairly high owned compared to what I was expecting. A lot of that is probably due to the fact that he is also available at 5/8. Look, apparently he looked very good in the first trial for Manly. I haven't watched that game or any highlights, so I can't really comment on that side of it. Average 55 last season. I imagine people are looking at him as potentially a cheaper option in the 5/8 spot, not necessarily the halfback spot. So I may leave him, and I might talk about him a little bit more in the 5/8 video because he's probably not going to be a real consideration, I think, in halfback when a lot of people are just going to be going that Nicho and Cleary combination. Braden Trindle at 439k with an average of 43. So he's currently 6% owned. Now, I have seen him trickle through in a few teams. A lot of that is, I think, due to any time that Nicho Hynes doesn't play and Trindle becomes the primary playmaker for the Sharks, he does become the goal kicker, which is appealing. I suspect that Hynes will keep the goal kicking, though, when they're both the half and 5/8 combination from round 1. In the games in 2023, when he didn't play with Nicho Hynes, his average was 55, so it was definitely some value on that 43 average. When he was playing with Hynes last season, and I've run the numbers looking at him based on 80-minute games, his average was 48. So if you now expect full 80-minute games, he is the 5/8. Playing with Nicho Hynes, his average will be slightly higher at 48, so call it maybe 50 if you see general improvement in the player. So there is 7 points of value there, so maybe you can tuck him away in your 5/8 spot. The only issue with him as your second halfback is that come round 5, both him and Hynes, assuming you're starting with Hynes, are going to be on the bye that week, so you won't have a playing halfback. That's the only thing you probably need to consider. In general, I'm probably not super keen on going with one of these cheaper options as a broader comment, more because of that high upside that we know the halfback spot can have. So I've not really been considering Braden Trindle. I know some others out there because of that potential value when he plays 80-minute games, but I think I want to see it before I believe it. I guess the other pro for him is that he does have that good draw. Round 2, round 3 are pretty good matchup. So maybe you're looking at it as just target him for the first 4 weeks, try to make some cash, use that cash elsewhere, and then maybe by round 5 you try to flip him to Cleary. If that's your plan, then I don't mind it as a short-term play, but obviously it does carry some risk where you're probably booking in some trades, whereas you saw other people saying that they want the Hynes-Cleary combination because it just means that they can save trades and use those trades elsewhere in their team, and I'm probably leaning towards that mode of thinking as well. Jaden Sullivan and Aiden Sezer from the West Tigers. So Aiden Sezer is actually the third most popular halfback in SuperCoach at the moment, 13% owned, coming in at 345k. So I've pulled below me his historic averages when he was last in the NRL between 2012 to 2019. Now there were 2 seasons when he was the primary goal kicker, which I believe was 2013 and 2015, and his average was 60, which is fairly respectable, especially if you're only paying 345k. To me, he does feel like really the only option. I think if you're not going Hynes Cleary or if you're not going Hynes Moses, he's probably the only other one I'd consider, just because he's more of a value prospect, I guess, where you're paying 345k and you know he is someone who, if he is a goal kicker, can get to that 60 average. The only issue I see is that I don't know how SuperCoach friendly he is. Like if you look at those other averages when he wasn't the main goal kicker, it's 40, 48, 35, 42, 35, 38. You're not really getting a tremendous amount of value out of him. And this is one of those things with SuperCoach where at the beginning of the season, you are chasing value in some spots, but you're also chasing points. And the halfback spot is a place where I think you need to be prioritizing points, not necessarily value. It's just even worse that he's got the bye in round 1. So you're not going to get any points out of him. And if your plan is to try to flip him to Cleary by that kind of round 7 point when he does play Penrith, that's one less week of price changes that you'll be able to get out of him at the beginning. So it's just another reason why I'm not overly keen on Aiden Sezer to start the year. I think the only instance that I'll probably go cheap in my second halfback spot, I should say, is similar to what we had with someone like Brad Schneider from I think a couple of seasons ago, where he was coming in as an absolute bottom dollar cheapie, and he was the goal kicker as well. So he had some things about him where it was like, look, he's coming in bottom dollar. If he just scores 50, he's going to make me serious money. And then you're willing to cop that compromise on points. With Sezer, 345k is not quite bottom dollar. Even if he gets to around a 45-50 average, look, you're obviously getting some value. But 45-50 out of your second halfback spot, are you willing to just take that and take some okay cash growth? Or do you just say, stuff it, I'm just going to pay the big bucks and get the guys who can score me that 90, 100 plus on a more consistent basis? That's kind of, I guess, the decision making you need to put in your team. But I'm leaning towards just spending the big money at halfback. I added Chanel Harris-Tavita here at 8% owned, mainly because of his ownership, but he's coming in at 238k. I don't believe he'll be in the starting halves for the Warriors, remains to be seen, but I suspect it will be SJ and then one of Luke Metcalf or Tamara Martin. So again, just throwing it out there that I don't really think he's going to be a viable cheapie to start the year. Just wanted to quickly comment on him, just given his 8% ownership. Well, that's it, guys. That is my breakdown on the halfback position, but hopefully you did find some value in this one. If you did, do please give it a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing as well to the channel if you haven't already, and see you all in the next one.